Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I'll be trying to look at whether the Gizeh level in the Great Circle is accurate. If I'm missing anything or if there's anything you'd like to elaborate on, please by all means add something in the comments. I'd love to know more. There are some things I can't even identify, and I'll be honest, when I don't know something. And part of me doing this is also, it's for fun, it's for myself, to really immerse in this, get myself to read more about different regions in the world, but also to share things I found odd that maybe you can answer as well. Now, overall, the actual complex itself, it is pretty accurate. I'm not sure if it's entirely a one-to-one representation. It's relatively proportionally correct, and it only focuses on a small area, which also helps it be a little bit more precise in how they present the pyramids and where everything is located. So, of course, focusing only on two of the pyramids, the black rectangle I overlaid on top just to show you the actual area that this entire level is in. Right? So it's actually a pretty small component of the Gizeh Plateau. And you can see the incredible development all around it. It's a good and bad thing. You don't always need to have Assassin's Creed Origins level of scale. You can really sometimes focus in on smaller areas and still very successfully create wonderful level. And zooming in a little bit more, here's a cropped image of just the level area. So you can see it really does, cut off parts of the pyramids of Khafre and Khufu, and the tomb of Khentakawes is there, and the Gizeh village, which is not called the Gizeh village per se. And focusing on the density is actually a pretty cool idea. So here's to the developers. Assassin's Creed Origins is great in terms of its broad scope of different monuments, that this provides a lot more resolution. It gives a little bit more detail. It gives a little bit more character. These are more technical maps where you can see all the cemeteries where we're actually walking around in, and particularly the Khentakawes town and the Central Fields Cemetery, where the workers' area, and just spaces that we're wandering about. And for the purposes of this video, it's probably not necessary for me to go through all the reigns of the three main pharaohs, but rather just focus on who the three are. So the three main pyramids were the tombs of three rulers. The first one is Khufu, is the largest and the oldest, and he's the one at the top here. You can even see by the artwork, he's the old guy. And his son Khafre built the second largest one. He's the one in the middle. And Menkaure, he actually is surprisingly also the smallest. So it seems that there's a ongoing shift from the largest waning through time, and to the point where in the game we don't even get to visit Menkaure's pyramid. I believe Indy even makes a little comment about it being off in the distance there. So unfortunately, they're all in the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, but not everything that we will see in the game belongs to the Old Kingdom, of course. And given the scope of what we're talking about here, I'm not going to look into cross-comparing the juxtaposition chronologies when it comes to a lot of these video games. There's naturally going to be a juxtaposition of it. There's going to be a bit of mix in details just to make levels look nice. So I won't go obsess over that too much, but rather focus on what these things are and what meanings that they had. So let's try to get a better look at what we're seeing when we look at the map. It's actually quite accurate in many ways. It has impressions of different features, and I think one of the main ones that we see in the center is the complex of Khafre. So you have the pyramid itself, and you actually have the mortuary temple in front of it, as well as what you can see is the Sphinx and the Sphinx temple and the Valley temple. And so a lot of these, the Sphinx temple and the Sphinx is a bit of more of an anomaly, because not every pyramid has a Sphinx. This one is unique and specific, but most of these complexes, whether we're talking about the pyramid complex of Menkaure, or we're talking about the pyramid complex of Khufu, or in Khafre in this case, we have a pretty clear idea of where everything was and why it was there. So every pyramid that acted as the tomb or the cenotaph, if there was no intended body there, just a place to represent or project the power of the pharaoh. But every one of these pyramids also had what's known as a mortuary temple with a causeway or a processional route that led to a valley temple. Now the valley temple, and this is repeated in all three of these main pyramids at Gizeh. And yeah, so the valley temple was further away. It was the place where certain ceremonies, such as the opening of the mouth ceremony or maybe even the mummification process, could occur. And then the body would be brought along the causeway to the mortuary temple and then to the tomb. And the mortuary temple would be where the offerings and the blessings or visitation and celebrations would occur. So not too different from any of tombs and places of famous figures, even up till in other cultures and up until even presently in certain cases. There's a place to worship or visit or pay their respects to the dead as well. So that is a pattern that we see across, and we can actually walk through components of it. So here we are in the Valley Temple. So you can see we're right near the Sphinx. Across from it here is the Valley Temple over on the left-hand side. Okay, so that was the Valley Temple. This is actually the Sphinx Temple, or the so-called Sphinx Amphitheater. Just taking a look at it. So here, let's see if we can line ourselves up and just run across. Let's see. So far no causeway. So a causeway would be this giant kind of hall area, and it would have actually had this covering on top, possibly a roof, and to help guide. And oh, you kind of see it, yeah. So you can see it's this kind of paved area, this paved road, and you can see there's some blocks on the side too. So those would have been the sides of it, and that would have contained a roof, or held up a roof rather. And so yeah, pretty good. I mean, it's for a small feature that you don't really use, though I guess given how important Khafre's pyramid is in the end of this level, it does make a lot of sense that they did emphasize this space a lot, right? Because it's a kind of actually, come to think of it, the area that we end up being underneath is kind of on the causeway, actually, to some extent. Actually, wait, let's see when we get there. Okay, so there's a break in the causeway here. I'm not quite sure if there is anything similar in terms of a break in the causeway like this in real life, but certainly they have really made good use of it to kind of demonstrate the different layers and levels of it, I guess, for and how the Germans are using this space. So you can see a truck park there. You can see the other part of it. It does give quite a scale to it, I would say. Alright, you can... And yeah, so it actually does continue, and they are using spots of it for as like lookout and watch areas. You kind of have to sneak around, but if you don't have a disguise, of course. And yeah, it looks like they're using cranes to... I guess in the game they fictionalize it in a way, so they show them kind of removing chunks of it as well. They're actually running a pipe through it, I think, for the to run water to the Khentakawes temple and tomb complex in the game. And I don't know if it's actually that thick, if the causeway is actually that thick, but yeah, this is even better. You put a tent in there. Sorry, my Canadian is showing. Okay. So yeah, so you can see okay, alright, so now we're ending at the end of the causeway, and we're entering the mortuary temple itself. And let's see if it has, like, it lights up or something. It has the location marker Oh, there we go. So yeah, they did take the time to indicate that it is. And so let's kind of get a sense of where all the layout of this temple, and I'll see if I can juxtapose that with like the actual plan of the mortuary temple. So it's pretty good. Actually, it definitely captures the monumentality of sorry, the monumental kind of feel of walking through these spaces, I would say. Okay, so yeah, the pyramid of Khufu, when we look at it, it's actually the only one that has the the outer casing on at the top. That otherwise, for all of the pyramids, including the Khufu's pyramid, you see all the steps because the stone blocks, because it was quarried for later use in more recent periods. So yeah, so you can see the kind of secret entrance area. It's right off the side. And yeah, let's see how close we can actually get. Let's see if I can push the limit of getting up close to the blocks or not. Okay, let's try to see if I can get around it a little bit. I don't... That kind of looks like something, isn't something? They look... Okay, so let's just go straight up. And...
Nothing but dunes and heat.
Yeah, okay, and indeed... Yeah. Sorry about that. So yeah, okay, definitely can't go up any blocks. Indy was able to climb it when he was a young boy, but at his age, what is he, 38 or so? In Great Circle. Fortunately, just can't do it, it seems. Let's see if we can get around to see if there's any other kind of... Because the complex itself, the pyramid, there should be technically a kind of a perimeter wall as well, which probably isn't going to be visible. Yeah, and like at least the original construction would have had it, and obviously that wouldn't be very visible. But like today. But yeah, so definitely can't go in there. With Menkaure's pyramid, not only is it kind of out of bounds, it's also just everything's just covered in sand. You don't actually see any of the features, so they didn't design it, or I guess in the universe it's supposed to be some of the more kind of covered up material, I guess.
I think I should turn back.
Yeah, so with Khufu's pyramid, you can't really get up to it very close. You can see how gigantic it is, and there's kind of a space that I just came out of that's through these tunnels, but it doesn't really reach into the pyramid itself. And again, you can see they really did try to capture how just gigantic like this construction is, and also curiously they have the Germans using bulldozers and to what seems like they're removing China roof chunks of the pyramid itself, which is crazy. But yeah, it's really can't get very close to it now. Other than that, and you can see here that area is completely fenced off. That would be on the... So we're at the south side of the pyramid, so we're actually on the side of it. This is... which technically is a good spot because it's a little bit more empty. This wall, I don't know whether that's meant to be one of the perimeter walls or whether they just It looks like they might have just added it just to create another barrier. But yeah, smaller pyramids beyond this gate, that those are the Queen's pyramids. And let's see. And you can go in here. But yeah, it's there's actually, as you move over here, you see another gate here. So it'd be cool if you could actually walk through it. It seems like it was rendered, so that's the Pyramid of Khufu, and that's one of the Queen's pyramids. And you can through that area, right by the north side of the pyramid, would be where you would find the boat pits. One really, really cool discovery at the Pyramid of Khufu, are these boat pits that actually had a whole gigantic solar barge of sorts. So there are debates over how functional it really was. It's not at the Ziggurat of Ur if you want to find a gigantic ship. And I think this might actually be the inspiration for how they present the fictionalized version of the Ark, underneath the Ziggurat of Ur in the game. And in real life, by the Pyramid of Khufu, you have this gigantic ship. So again, so you can actually see that where the developers are mixing and matching and changing up ideas, basing it off of some degree of actual archaeology, but changing it up to fit their own narrative in the story, which is cool, which is far better than, I think, sometimes going off at random. And I think I love all of the Indiana Jones games. I love all of the Tomb Raider games. But as an archaeologist, seeing this clear actual research that they modify, granted they modified it, is still pretty awesome to see. To be able to look at that and be able to backtrack it and be a total nerd about it. It's like fan service for archaeologists in a sense. The boat pits are actually right out of the reach of where we can get to in the game. So unfortunately, it can't even show you where it is, where the boat pits are, by walking over there, unfortunately. But it is actually now housed in a museum safely, so you can actually visit it if you'd like to see this solar barge. So actually, the one I just showed you was actually only one of two. There were actually two boats that were discovered or rediscovered and excavated by Kamal el-Malak, an Egyptian archaeologist, and his team. First in 1954, and then a little over a decade later, he found a second boat, much to the surprise of other archaeologists, but not him, because after finding the first one, he felt that there should be a second one, because he thought that it would be symbolic of Khafre having a boat representing the day and a boat representing the night, being a solar barge that would cycle back and forth. And he was proven correct by himself, actually, really putting in, over a decade of persistence. So some really amazing discoveries can be found with enough persistence. So yeah, so unfortunately you just really can't go through it. I wonder why I'm still wondering why they didn't just leave it open. I tried going up here as well to see if I could get a better vantage point, but no, really not possible. They surprisingly didn't give you kind of any open access to a roof. But it is kind of funny that Emmerich Voss puts his office right here, right by the Great Pyramid of Khufu. It shows his ego, really. The Sphinx itself is very interesting because it's a pretty good reconstruction of the Sphinx, actually. You can actually even see the components of which, a mix of the man-made components of the bricks versus the original stone outcrop that it originated from. So the Sphinx is partly a natural rocky outcrop that it's carved out of, as well as modifications with additional bricks and wheat at the bottom. And the Sphinx actually used to have a beard of sorts, a straight Egyptian beard, which is a symbol of the pharaoh themselves. And the Sphinx, being a partial representation of the pharaoh, would have also had one, and actually had at least two, it seems. So, and it's sort of today there are fragments of it in the Cairo Museum. There's a fragment of it in the British Museum as well. If you've ever watched Bob Brier's Great Courses Ancient Egypt course, which is a really wonderful watch. Certainly, I think it's from the 90s, recorded in the 90s or 2000s though. So it is sort of Egypt as it was understood a couple of decades ago, so at least. Wow, it's from the 2025, so that's been a while, but it's a wonderful watch if you're interested in this, and has a little bit more detail. But particularly, I think at one point he actually found that someone in the Cairo Museum was using a fragment to hold the door open because it's so big and heavy. So there were at least 2 attempts to create a beard. The initial one that would have been less ornate, and then after Prince Thutmose fell asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx, it spoke to him in a dream, promising him Egypt's throne, but pleading to be freed of accumulated sands. And on taking the throne, Thutmose the Fourth did clear and repair the Sphinx. The plated beard was likely his work. So this plated beard likely had a curved tip, which identified the wearer as a god. So then it's sort of, there's slight, changes to the Sphinx itself. And whereas the beard in Khafre's time would have been a straight beard. This new beard, which we see here, is also broken. So some of it was taken to the British Museum, some was taken to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. So it'd be great to repair and restore, but unfortunately it seems to really, the beard of all things doesn't really survive the test of time, and certainly I think would be a bit of a hazard if repaired. In addition to the beard, another major thing that was added to the Sphinx is the giant stela in between the Sphinx's arms, which if you've played Tomb Raider Last Revelation, that also shows up, but it's also somewhat modified compared to the original. This one is quite a little bit more faithful, though it has the modification of 3 different symbols to indicate, the Sphinx, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, and I think in another one to try to triangulate where the secret underground chamber for the final part of the level before moving on to the Himalayas. So there is a bit of modification, but overall this is actually the dream stela of Thutmose IV. So it is actually commemorating him having that vision when he fell asleep by the Sphinx and being told by the Sphinx in his dream that if he did certain things, he'd become the pharaoh. It is also very much a New Kingdom edition, so it's not anything that would have been a part of the original component of the Sphinx at the time of its initial construction. So again, when we look at these sites, we're looking at multiple phases, slight modifications, additions in time. So really can't think of these spaces as static at all. Now let's look at the tomb of Khentakawes I, so Queen Khentakawes, and that actually is roughly in terms of the actual pyramid itself. It's a 2-step pyramid, and it's what you see on the left-hand side here. That, which arguably is the spot that you explore the least, ironically, but it is I think the way the game designs itself is to put it in the vicinity, but not quite on it, to maintain a mix of reality and fiction. It's sort of meant to make it look like the undiscovered components of the site, rather than completely fictionalize the insides of the main pyramids. On the left-hand side, it is built on limestone elevation. Here's another view of it, and this is, right, you can see the limestone foundation and the light 2-step pyramid construction. Here's also an image of the cross-section of it in terms of where you would access the main chamber inside. So this is actually where the tomb of Khentakawes would be, inside the actual pyramid itself. The area that we see in the game is actually a mix of different things. Since 2005, there has been an ongoing project on the east side of the Khentakawes pyramid, or mastaba, and they've uncovered mainly what they call the Khentakawes town, which is the settlement for priests in the area, and they've sort of expanded further south towards the Menkaure's Valley Temple as well. And so a lot of the area that you actually see in the game being excavated actually has seen recent investigations, but it is more of a settlement than than anything else. Though granted, Salim Hassan, who I will talk about in a little bit, and he's the original archaeologist that Omar is based off of, was also active in the 1930s here. So here's a top plan of the area that we see in the game. That's roughly where the basin, the chapel, and the pyramid town would be. So we actually know quite a bit about this area now. But a lot of this is actually recent investigations revealing it. And there's actually another funerary boat pit that was found on the west side of the stepped tomb of Khentakawes I. And surprisingly, another thing that they really should have done more boat stuff with or boat-based things in this game, really, for the Gizeh section. But I suppose not all of these things would have been covered in the 1930s anyway. So, though granted, as I mentioned, with the pyramid of Khufu, there were 2 boat pits that were found, but Egyptologists in the region haven't actually found a second funerary boat pit yet. So only one has been found. It's possible that there's a second one, just like at Khufu's pyramid. Let's look at some of the archaeologists that are mentioned in this level, which are actually maybe some of them based off of real archaeologists, at least. Ironically, with Nawal Shafiq Barclay, I haven't really been able to find any real comparison per se among real-life archaeologists, because it's a very unique circumstance of being half British, half Egyptian, being very wealthy patron as well. The only person I can really think of is actually the fictional character of Evelyn Carnan, and for those of you who are not as familiar with the Mummy series, she's the character from the 90s version of the Mummy movies, and she's actually technically half Egyptian, half British. It's mentioned in that fireside camp scene when she tells Rick about her past, her father meeting her mother, and how deep this love of Egypt goes. So that said, delving a little bit more into it, I suppose you could compare her to an Egyptologist by the name of Dorothy Eadie, who is also sometimes, called herself Seti, because she was a serious Egyptologist who did make major contributions. She was the keeper of the Abydos Temple of Seti I, as well as the draughtswoman, so an illustrator for the Egyptian Department of Antiquities for a long time. And she actually did a lot of work on the folklore in Egypt as well. And but she's English. She was born in the UK. Though she also believed that she was actually reincarnated and that she had visions herself of being an Egyptian in a past life. But by and large, by everyone else's accounts, all her colleagues, Egyptian, American, or British, everyone seems to have really quite respected her actual academic work, including the next archaeologist I mentioned, who's the basis for Omar. So Omar's more concretely based off of the real-life archaeologist or Egyptologist Salim Hassan, who is actually a very foundational figure of Egyptology in the context of actual Egyptians being in charge of excavations, in charge of writing their own history in that sense. And he's the first Egyptian Egyptology professor at the University of Cairo. He was active in the 1930s, so including at the tomb of Khentakawes. So Omar we meet just by the tomb of Khentakawes with his really nice car in his tent and his corkboard and the artifacts that he's examining. And he's a lot younger, and he was a colleague of Dorothy Eadie as well. So there's that connection. In terms of statuary, there's actually a sort of overemphasis, or there's a greater representation of cat or lioness statues than there are other forms of animal statues, both in the Gizeh level but also in Marshall College. One of the first things we see and you pick up is the Bastet statue, which he calls a Bastet statue. It's probably correct because it is more cat-like, and it is placed in front of this image of Bastet, and much more cat-looking deity. But at the same time, there are different deities that exist that have similar forms. One being Sekhmet, that we see more in Gizeh in a seated position, so a little bit more anthropomorphic, I guess you could say. Whereas a lot of Bast or Bastet statues, while there are more humanoid forms, often Bastet's more clearly a cat. The seated lioness statue that you see throughout the Gizeh level. Again, far more than in real life. It seems like they really reuse this asset to decorate many different parts of the tunnels, underground passageways here in this game. And here's an example from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts of a Sekhmet statue in seated form. For comparison, I think it's not the same one, it's a little different, but I think close enough that you can actually see the approximation of what a real version of this would look like. So, because I wasn't able to quite find an exact version of this one. Now, after I recorded that, I realized I probably should check out Marshall College, and it turns out the same exact statue. It's made a little bit smaller and confirms that it is indeed a statue of Sekhmet, as opposed to Bastet, or as you'll see, the Wadjet in the form of a lioness. So it seems like they are adding some things that are actually in Marshall College already, so which doubles it a bit more. And actually, if this pattern occurs a few more times, there are a few more objects in Marshall College that you also see in Gizeh, like repeated a few times too. And I'll try to overlay this in between all the other things I recorded earlier. So another cat, I think, head that almost looks like it was one of those statues where the fragment is missing. It's mounted on a pedestal instead, but that you find in a museum. But another feline-headed statue or statue fragment, it seems. I don't know how many cat like busts this exist, but most portrayals of Bastet would be this much more cat-like form. On the left-hand side, you have canopic jars, so those would be the jars where some of the vital organs, not the brain though, would be stored. And in the center you have these tomb statues that are often of the deceased holding the shrine of a deity. And in the example I give you, it's the shrine of Osiris, like a little mini portable shrine that he's holding. Now, interestingly, in Marshall College, they don't have the same exact one, but they have other ones. So you can see on the right-hand side is the one that you would find in Gizeh. It actually looks either a little bit more worn down, or the textures, just the resolution on the textures just isn't as great. But when you go to Marshall College, you actually see several other ones with, in fact, even different deities as well that they're holding in their shrines. And you actually see a little bit more biographical information if you'd like to read what these statues are, actually. But that said, it could also be another goddess or deity known as Wadjet. So you're more familiar with the Wadjet in their Uraeus form. So that is when the Wadjet is looking like this snake, sometimes this winged snake with the disc on above its head. And it's actually a pre-dynastic, very early kind of local deity that then became a fundamental part of Egyptian iconography, even if it gets less focused than, let's say, Osiris or Horus or Set or Isis, for example. The Wadjet in Uraeus form is fundamentally a part of the Egyptian crown. If you look at the death mask of King Tut, you can also see the Uraeus on it, right above his forehead. So, but at the same time, the Wadjet can also be in lioness form, rather. So very much like the Sekhmet statues. But the only difference is that oftentimes in lion form she has the disc and the uraeus on top of her head like a headdress. We do see the uraeus, though, repeated multiple times as a part of the wall murals in the game. In this one, you just have the repeated motif of the uraeus in cobra form with the disc above its head. But we also see the uraeus in the form of flanking the winged sun disc as well, which you do see on actual lintels, as I mentioned in the Tomb Raider Anniversary and / Tomb Raider 1 Egypt level breakdown. So many of the interior walls of this level, you actually see this repeated pattern, perhaps arguably far more than it would ever be seen, I believe, in anywhere on the in Gizeh, of course. And it's the Jet and the Tiet symbols repeated back and forth, and ending in a cartouche with a name on it that I haven't really figured out whose it belongs to. But the jet and the teeth symbols represent Osiris and Isis. The jet symbol is that pillar with the little ridges across it, and that represents stability, as well as it can sometimes be compared to a spine, which it also is thought to somewhat represent symbolically. But it's also associated with the story of the death and resurrection of Osiris. When Osiris was killed by his brother Set, he was put into a coffin or a box and shoved off into the river, after which it hit a tree, and the tree grew around this coffin, encasing Osiris within it. Then a king, sometimes thought to be the king of Byblos, cuts the tree down and creates a pillar out of the component that has Osiris, not knowing that, of course. And Isis eventually finds Osiris in this pillar, which then kicks off the next section where Set tears Osiris to pieces, and Isis has to go and gather his pieces together and resurrect him, which then also later leads to him both being the king of the underworld as well as the birth of Horus, of course. And so that's the jet symbol. That's the symbol of stability, essentially. Whereas literally having a god as the pillar to uphold something, more or less, it's pretty dramatic. And then the other symbol, the teeth symbol, is the loop with the drooping cloths on the side. So it looks like an ankh, but it actually isn't. And it's a different symbol. There are repeating patterns that you might have seen if you watched the Tomb Raider 1 or Anniversary Egypt level. I discussed another repeating pattern that I'll actually talk about next. So, but this symbol, the teeth symbol, represents Isis, the blood of Isis, as well as, to some extent, life and regeneration. Do correct me if I'm wrong. Anyone out there who might know more about this symbol. So, the teeth symbol is actually sometimes amulets are shaped in the form of it, and they generally are red, and they can be placed with the dead as well. So they can be found in these funerary contexts with the body. But this symbol can be found on many other objects as well as a decorative motif. Again, that said, the frequency in which it appears in the Gizeh level is much like the feline-headed goddesses. The Jed and the Tit symbols also appear on this canopic box. So it's possible that it drew some inspiration from this box, but they just made it a wall design, or they found another one. They are certainly trying to be consistent in some ways in terms of the things that they're drawing from, it seems. And so just a quick refresher, here's an alternate pattern that you might see, which is the Jed, the Ankh, and the Was. So the Jed we already talked about, that's the pillar for stability. The Ankh is that loop with the cross in the form of at the top of a cross, more or less. That's a symbol of life, so that's not to be confused with the Tiet symbol of Isis. And then you have this curved stick, which is actually the Was, which is a scepter, and that represents the power or dominion. So you actually can see different Egyptian deities or figures, pharaohs, in association with any one of these three symbols as well. Sometimes they're presented in combination like this. And even in some situations, they can be combined into a single amulet as well to represent that combination of power, dominion, stability, and life, essentially. Osiris is also present in Marshall College in the form of a statue. And you can actually read the description for it too. Now, these mirror puzzles aren't actually a real thing, but rather they're a combination of influences from the Mummy series. For those of you who are familiar with the 90s, the Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz films, that is used very prominently to light up the rooms within Hamunaptra. But that also in and of itself is a bit of an influence from Secret of the Incas with Charlton Heston that also influenced Indiana Jones. That has a reflective component to it that is also the inspiration for when the staff of Ra, the light beam goes through and shows the exact location of where the Ark is on a little model of the city of Tanis in Raiders. Sometimes the wall decorations are jumbled together as well. So you see you have a bit of a mural of a wall painting of the mummification process with either Anubis or a person wearing an Anubis mask carrying out the mummification process. But at the bottom you actually have a very famous image of Nefertari playing the game of Senet, and it's sort of just on the textures of the stone blocks, it seems, the way it's just painted on, it cuts off at odd angles. Here's a comparison with the actual image of Nefertari playing Senet. So Senet is a game that I've covered before, but it's essentially a racing game. Your goal is to get your pieces across the board and out the other end as fast as possible, faster than the other person. And you sometimes throw stick dice. So basically the way the two different sticks land determines the number of movements. So it's actually one of the earliest known board games. You might sometimes see in older sources Murray's History of Chess. So, sorry, this is also another interest of mine. There is this sort of misinterpretation of this scene as an early form of it, which it isn't. It's the game of Senet. So here's a better image of the wall painting of the mummification process of the Anubis or Anubis imitator over the body of the dead. If you look carefully you see the Ankh symbols throughout, as well as you see the actual was, the scepter, the staff as well here, as well as Osiris. These paintings are very common, so it's hard to identify exactly which tomb this one comes from. It's actually quite a fundamental image of many tombs. So sometimes you'll actually see these smaller little ram sphinxes in alcoves along interior walls, and this is actually a very reduced version of real ram sphinxes that are found, most particularly in Thebes, where there's this avenue of sphinxes, and between the paws of these sphinxes there's this humanoid figure, and that should be the king. And the ram in this case is often associated with Amun-Ra, as opposed to some of the other more commonly ram-headed gods, like Khnum and another one I can't pronounce that has like 4 heads. This miniaturized ram sphinx is also found in Marshall College. You actually get much more fictionalized versions of some of these human statues with the blindfold and the eye symbol on top, representing either the actual giant that you fight in the underground area, or maybe an ancestor. A little bit of foreshadowing of who you're going to fight, essentially. I also found this wall painting that's almost framed in the level, and I haven't been able to find the actual original that it's based off of, or it seems to be based off of, but it is a representation of the Ba bird and a false door. So the Ba bird is basically essentially a component of your soul. In Egyptian ideas of the conception of the soul, when you die, it separates into different parts, one of which is the Ba. Sometimes it's simplified as personality, but it is basically more fundamentally the component of yourself that can go between the realm of the living and the dead, essentially. And the false door that you see here is actually the portal, the doorway, how you go from the land of the living to the land of the dead. And your Ba form is the one that will be able to pass through this false door. Another similar wall painting that I found was this painting of a false door in the center with the eyes of Horus, or known as the Wijat. So not to be confused with the Wajet. The Wajet is the Uraeus, occasionally lioness deity that I talked about in the snake form. But the Wijat is the eye of Horus. So it's a very good protective, regenerative symbol, but I haven't been able to find a real life example that this is specifically based off of, unfortunately. There's actually a third variation with the false door as well, and this one's really interesting because on the right hand side you have the Wajet, so in Uraeus form but with the wings in front of her, and as well as the red crown of Lower Egypt. Whereas on opposite of Wajet, you have the Nekbet bird with the white crown of Upper Egypt. So combined together, that represents the unified Egypt of Upper and Lower Egypt, so with both crowns. And so it's very, very interesting. I don't know where this one comes from. There is also a section of a false door that is mounted inside Marshall College. So if you want to see a different one, the others are paintings. This is more of an actual false door. Though I believe it's on a smaller scale than you'd actually see. So there's a bit of manipulation with scale here going on. Just like the Sekhmet statue on the left. So the eyes also adorn the sarcophagus here, or the outer stone casing. I haven't seen a lot of like stone sarcophagi that this reminds me of exactly. So if anyone out there is a specialist in sarcophagi that this, or I'd love to know more specifically the chronology of this thing. Another motif that's present in multiple areas is this blue background with figures often on boats. Oh, and here's one example. Here's another one with some stars on the side indicating that it's night. Right, these seem to be, of course, the Egyptian pantheon. And here are a few more, and I can't quite place the exact scenes that this might be per se, but it reminds me of the hypostyle hall in Dendera. There's a scene of the night sky, and I'll show you what, like, give you a comparison. And on the ceiling of it, there's actually an image of not the goddess of the sky, or nighttime sky, or goddess of the stars, who every day chases after the sun, chases after Ra, and at the end of the day swallows him in some myths before giving birth to him again in the day. And there are multiple different day-night cycle myths connected to different deities involved. So this is one of them. And Ra also travels across the sky during the day and the night, as I mentioned, right, through different boats. But in terms of the Ndera example, also has a much more astronomical component to it that I don't think I'm quite qualified to entirely explain. But it seems to be that this is what they've turned these ceiling designs into more textures for walls in the Great Circle. It's definitely worth reading about if you're interested in this. It's pretty cool. Actually, in this photo, you can see not swallowing the sun right there. At the base of at least one pillar in the fictionalized kind of underground area of Khentakawes, you actually see a set of 4 baboons with their hands faced up. And so that's actually very specific. They're baboons in different positions, seated, hands down, hands up, as deities and whatnot. But this is not as a deity. Seems to be more of a worshipping baboon, from what I've found, which is pretty funny. There's an example from the Met Museum, and it's not necessarily the same exact thing that we're seeing on this pillar, but it's the Met Museum example. It comes from the New Kingdom and interprets this one example of these worshipping baboons as prototypical adorers of the rising and setting sun, and their chatter held secret knowledge they hoped to share. And it's very, very interpretive. But yes, so this one's associated with Ramesses II. Now, interestingly, the worn down pillar baboons that you just saw earlier isn't shown in the Marshall College, but there is a different baboon. It's also different from the one I showed you with the hands up. This one has its hands hanging down. It references how this example in the University Museum has a missing lunar disk that would have been attached to it. So I found an example from the Met Museum in New York of one with what the lunar disk would have looked like on top. This is the Met Museum example with lunar disk is actually a smaller amulet. That's why the detail's a little bit more funky, because it's much smaller. But it gives you a bit of an idea of what this, if it is based off of a real artifact, what it would have looked like with the disc on top. So the statue of a pharaoh or a man, well, a pharaoh, with the headdress that you see, that indicates that they are a pharaoh. A commoner would not have that headdress. So yeah, statues of this guy is also present in a lot of the interior areas, sometimes with the arm broken, sometimes with the arm intact. There's a bit of definition in terms of his musculature, but his face looks, and his face, I don't know, it looks funky to me. It doesn't look like a lot of things I've seen, but there are many statues of pharaohs with that headdress and a shirtless in this ways, but I haven't been able to identify a specific match to this one. That said, I did find this photo of Arnold with a seated statue of Ramesses, so well, there's that. And this looks like this is a standing sarcophagus, but I don't really know what I can make out of it or if I can match it to anything. The texture's a little odd. It's very much It's like they use the colors and the textures of the wall or something just to and kind of just painted it over in a, in a bland way. I mean, it doesn't quite look like stone, but also it isn't painted quite like in a very vivid way to show much else. Looks like an older gentleman based off of the face though. Can't place it. If anyone knows, please leave a comment on what that is, because I swear I've seen something like this. I just don't know what it is. I also saw this, but I don't know what to make of it because it seems like a mishmash of different things. On the top you have a cartouche with a hieroglyph on it. Then you have a symbol that I'm blanking on right now. A woman with her arms held up high, and then she seems to be almost cut off. Right beneath it you have a very big, I think what looks like a Tiet symbol. So it's not actually her body, but rather it is a Tiet symbol. And then at the bottom you have what appear to be false doors. So I don't know if an Egyptologist or specializing in iconography could talk more about this. I would love to know what's going on here. And that's about it for this time. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Please like and subscribe, and I'll make more videos on Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, and eventually I'll do Uncharted 2. Well, 3 and 4 also. And Drake's Fortune. Sorry, it's a bad joke. See you next time.